Hello, everyone. I am beyond ecstatic and happy today to share with you all and also welcome you all to our next and one of the most amazing DHN episodes we've had this season. I am joined by one of our own amazing industry champions, leaders, mentors, Dr. Zafar. We're going to discuss the role of a modern CIO in the age and era of AI. Before we get started, Dr. Zafar, could you share a little bit about who you are and your background with the few folks out there but that might not have had the privilege of hearing you talk or being engaged with you in some fashion?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on the episode. It's an honor to be here. So, Zafar Chowdhury, I'm a recovering physician. I don't think I recovered yet, but I've been in the healthcare IT arena now for 40 years. I've worked in CIO, CTO, CISO roles across the world for over 25 years. And now currently looking for my next role.
Well, ever since I've been around, the role of the CIO continues to change and continues to evolve. And one thing we know is they're always in the middle of everything going on, and it often makes sense. The CIO is no longer just a technical operator in what we do and just running the day-to-day technical operations. They're part of the business transformation and that strategic plan. From your experience and role, who has continuously coached our CIOs and our evolving leaders, how do you think the role of the CIO has evolved as a technology leader to this enterprise strategist and orchestrator?
Yeah, so I think the role over the years has started to be rewritten. The evolution of the CIO from a technology operator to an enterprise strategist is a shift from managing inputs to owning actual outcomes. Historically, if you were a successful CIO, you were measured by things like uptime and service level agreements. But today, the role is defined by the ability to orchestrate enterprise intelligence. We're no longer just keeping the lights on or doors open. We're illuminating the path toward clinical efficiency and financial stability and sustainability. I think in the new health economy, the defining leadership capabilities for the next generation of CIO should include clinical empathy, the ability to translate technical architecture into bedside value so that you can ensure that you can reduce clinician burnout rather than adding to it. The other thing would be architectural agility. So moving away from monolithic legacy systems toward a modular private or public cloud first environment that can pivot as fast as AI models evolve. Business model innovation. So the CIO needs to understand the shift from a fee for service to a value-based care and design data ecosystems that support that transition. And finally, I think what's really dear to my heart is customer focus. CIOs need to put the people that they serve first: clinicians, nurses, allied health professionals, patients, parents, caregivers. And most importantly, on top of that, you must measure that satisfaction. It's no use to say you are good at what you do and you don't actually measure it. And you should use industry standards to make those measurements. So that's how I see it evolving.
It is so much there that you packed into that statement. Just keeping the lights on often take all of our resources and take a lot of attention. And we take it for granted if we have a very stable environment. It's not because a million things aren't happening behind the background. And then on top of that, everything you just mentioned. So as a leader, what leadership capabilities would you say defines the next generation of our successful CIOs?
Well, first of all, you must collaborate because this is a support service and you can't do it in isolation. Most importantly, engagement. So engaging your own teams at all levels, from the front line all the way to leadership within IT. And in parallel, the same in your hospital system. So going out and engaging the doctors, the nurses, the allied health professionals, speaking extensively to patients, and making sure that you are getting a multi-pronged input into how services are running. Leading from your office is not a good strategy. You have to be out there on the floor, walking the floor, understanding what's happening, and most importantly, professionally develop people at the same time. Because we as CIOs, we're not going to be in the seat for a really long time. Actually, data shows that CIOs over 50 are in a very small majority now. Most are retiring out from the system, so we need to develop the next generation. And one thing I've learned in my journey is the new generation of IT employee in healthcare, the Gen Zs and Zillennials, they think very differently than I do. I mean, I'm antiquated and old, and the young folks are very much, they're driven by the next task, they're driven by the next achievement, they're driven by the next challenge. They're not driven by micromanagement, they're not driven by hierarchy, they're not driven by over-governance. They really are driven by giving them freedom to spread their wings and show their abilities and support whatever mission you're serving in your health system.
And everything you've said there, you don't just say that, but you practice it. I remember many of your conversations where you're out there and talking to the families, talking to your patients, no matter how old they are. You always have a pulse on what is going on in your environment in regards to any kind of solution you and your team has deployed. So when we're looking at patterns that you see across health systems when it comes to digital and AI leadership, you've touched on this a little bit, and you touched on generational variability. Can you summarize one more time what you see as being some patterns that bring success for our leaders?
Yeah, so I think across health systems, I see a clear divide between digital first versus digital only. And of course, there's many interesting definitions of the word digital. The most successful leaders are those who treat digital and AI not as a separate portfolio, but as the fabric of the entire operating model. You know, while many are focused on procurement, elite CIOs are focused on change management. It's not a technology job anymore. It's a people, change, evangelistic sales job that CIOs are doing. Honestly, nobody cares about the technology or the flashy lights or all the fabulous systems that you've bought, because they're of no use if they don't actually work. And people consuming healthcare systems and technology need to consume those systems as and where and when they want, not because you dictated they can or they can't. And if you say no as a CIO in healthcare, people will find shadow ways of doing it anyway.
Yeah.
So you fool yourself when you say, oh, I'm going to pull in a massive governance model that can actually control this domain space, because you can't. People will go out to Costco and buy their own equipment and run it under their desks, and you just won't know about it, which will then put your health system at risk. So I think you've got to think about, you as a CIO, you're not just buying tools, you're redesigning workflows before you buy any new software. You've got to prioritize data liquidity, ensuring that information isn't just stored, but it's actually liquid enough to flow to the point of care in real time. So those are really important things people need to think about. It's not that I am not a fan of process or governance. But what I've learned in 40 years, and I've worked in so many different health systems across the world, is that you as a person saying no will crash the system faster than anything else. And if you're dealing with clinicians, it's one situation. If you're dealing with researchers, it's a very different situation. And so you need to be the facilitator of yes, right? How do you actually get things done? Make it simple for people to understand. Yes, have process. I'm not saying avoid the paperwork, but figure out how it can be streamlined. And in this world of automation and AI, do you really need another committee or 5 more governance panels? Or can you automate some of those approval processes based on criteria that have been preset, predetermined, and agreed upon by a multidisciplinary group of stakeholders, which is also important?
Um, I laughed a little bit when you said they'll go to Costco and put the computer, and you'll learn about it when they put in a ticket because somehow that's not working. They want you to fix it and bring it back online, or something failed,
Exactly.
right?
Or the dreaded service ticket that says there's smoke coming out of my machine and I've lost my data.
Oh,
And then
yeah,
they come to you and say, well, how do you recover that?
yeah,
But there wasn't a second backup copy. So
right.
I like to say that in healthcare, in my journey, I've seen a lot of leaders bury their head in the sand, thinking that they can control the domain space. And superficially, it looks great. Oh, I have all these structures in place and I know exactly what's going on. But you don't, because employees in any health system, they think outside the box. Clinicians have to think outside the box, because how else are they going to take care of you? And lives are in their hands. So clinicians and researchers, when you become the sticky point, when you become the person that doesn't allow them to do what they think they need to do, they find very interesting ways of using cloud, personal storage, personal hardware devices. And I think technology, with the rise of cloud, I mean, what do you really need to run an entire infrastructure? Your credit card? You could build an entire infrastructure and run it in any cloud-based platform without telling anyone. So
Oh,
you fool yourself into saying, well, I have a governance structure, I told them not to do it, or we didn't have the resources to do it, but they needed to do it.
yeah. And you've touched on this multiple times, is communication, that transparency. And it sounds so fundamental, but it is worth stating over and over again, because that is the core of whether it's building that rapport, building that trust, listening and getting feedback from your users on what they want, why they need it. And I just wanted to reiterate that again. Doesn't matter what title you have, if you don't have that communication and that transparency and relationship, to your point, it doesn't matter how much governance and processes you have in place, things will start crumbling around you.
Yeah, you can never communicate enough.
Right.
When they do satisfaction surveys in health systems, whether it's patients or clinicians, the biggest thing that always pops up is I didn't know what was going on, because people weren't transparent, they didn't communicate, they didn't give the message. A very smart chief people officer, as a good friend of mine, once told me that in order to do change management, you must reiterate a message at least 7 times before it actually filters into anybody's head.
Mhm.
So if you're not, as a CIO, communicating what your team is doing and how they're doing it 7 times over in multiple forums across the entire health system, and you could have thousands of people, then you're not getting the message
Right.
across. Because the assumption we make that we sent a mass mailer email to everyone, those get auto-deleted. People don't read them, right? So we always say, oh yeah, we send an update leadership message every Friday or Monday or Wednesday, whatever that day is for you in the health system. How many people actually look at that? I when I'm working in a health system, I tend to send a Friday informational email to all my teams. In my past role, I had 500 people, and I sent them an email every Friday giving them insights into what's going on. But when I looked at the data, how many people are actually opening that email? It was not even half of those 500 people. That's how I knew that that could not be the only way I give the message. So I had to bolster that with all hands meetings and town hall meetings. And even those may not be enough. You just have to keep reiterating the same message over and over again. And the other thing to also think about as a CIO is you may think you're the smartest person in the room, but you're not. Right? You have to understand and be at the level of the people that you serve. Just because you have 17 degrees and you have a big title means nothing. Title means nothing. To many in my industry, title means everything. To me, I would say title means nothing because you're only as good as that title the day you're sitting in that seat. What is most important is the impact you as a CIO have on the workforce, that lasting impact. And can you emphasize that multiple times over so that it actually is accepted and put into practice? And most importantly, how do you sustain that message?
Something else that I just heard you say that I love is that you said you communicated with your staff every Friday. The reason I bring that up is when there's a cadence, when there's a reliability of people who hear your messages, that is valuable as well. Your team, or even maybe super users or whoever that might be getting your messages in whatever channel you're putting it out in, when they know you have a cadence, I think you start gaining more eyes, more ears, listening and open to what you are sharing. I think there's a lot of value there when there's consistency in your communication.
That's the key word, right? People need consistency, people need structure,
Yeah,
and people need something to rely on.
yeah,
So if you provide that in your communication, they may not like the message you give,
mhm,
right? The message could be difficult. It could be, in today's climate, could be anything from, you know, reduction in force to job losses to reduction in spending, all kinds of things that people don't want to hear. But what they do appreciate is that consistency in message. And if you know as a leader something is coming, you should pre-warn people because sugarcoating something may work temporarily, but then proves that leader to then be a liar if they say it's all amazing and then it isn't amazing, right? I think
no.
you have to be very clear on exactly what's going on to the extent that you're allowed to tell everyone, but you should have consistency of messaging. 100% agree with you.
So moving on, you touched on governance, modeling, and a little bit of scalability based on your environment and the realities of what can be done in your environment. So I want to dig into a little bit more about the healthcare CIO and how they're leading that strategy, or are they really reacting to the pressure of the board or the physicians or who, their CEO? What is that balance there that you have seen work best? You've touched a little bit already when it comes to expectation setting, communication, and obviously being at the table so that you're helping drive those strategies and conversations. But I wanted to dig a little deeper into that with you.
So I think the messaging as a CIO, first thing you have to learn is that art of communication. What is the level of audience you're talking to? So a board level conversation is very different than a frontline conversation. It's very different than a committee meeting conversation. It's very different than talking to researchers versus talking to hospital-based clinicians. You do have to think about what are you trying to message. The other thing I always say to people is always tone down your communication to more so an eighth grade level. one thing we get slated for as technologists is our ability to overutilize complex terminology. And we like to bamboozle people with really big words that we know don't mean very much, but sound super impressive in a meeting. I don't believe that that's the way forwards. I think if you're talking to a board, most board members are volunteers. They're not necessarily technologists. Some of them could be strategists. Some of them could be from a technology industry. So you have to tailor the message to how they understand what you're talking about. So if you're talking about disaster recovery and security, then you need to give them real world examples of what that means. Using big terminology like phishing attacks and dark web sound amazing, but they don't know what you're talking about. So you have to give them examples. I'm also a believer that when you're talking to groups of individuals, you should try and emphasize your point using storytelling. Use examples of what you have seen in your own personal professional career as examples that people can resonate with. And without that resonation, people can't connect. And they need to connect to the message that you're giving. So you can be very stoic and come in with really, really difficult terminology, and you might sound intelligent, but people don't get it. But if you look at your audience, so for example, I have the advantage of having been clinical. I like to use clinical stories with clinical team members and employees because I know that the light bulb moment will go off because they've probably been in that situation themselves. Versus if you're talking to parents, you've got to give examples of solutions you've provided to parents in roles that you may have had or patients. And so those are the things you've got to think about when changing that message. And if you're talking to frontline individuals, they are the core and backbone of a health system. And we should never, never underestimate the frontline. The frontline is also the least paid in the health system and probably the hardest working. So those individuals don't work for much money per hour, but probably serve very well the same mission that you do. So you've got to bring it down to their level and associate the situation or the problem or the solution to them at their level. And that's a gap, right? So many CIOs are very much technologists, very much focused on the next innovation, the next big thing, but don't fix the core basis of their health system, right? It's not sexy to make sure that tickets are closed quickly. It's not sexy to know that people need to get their laptops within a decent period of time. But people don't focus on that. People focus on, oh, look at me, I've done another AI. And that's what impacts the industry, right? Is you've got to really focus on fixing the core basics, the lights on, doors open, make sure that you measure it and it's great. And then you create this trust fabric. And then you use that to articulate future messages, have difficult conversations, and work through where you need people's help. Because the role of the CIO is powerless without the help of the customers that you serve. So if they're not happy with you, you're not going to get buy-in and support.
I love what you just said, the trust fabric. And I would dare say that is very much in alignment for the CIO also with their C-level partners like the CFO, the COO, the CEO, having that everything you just shared for them to do that with those individuals so that they're also on the same playing ground and moving on the same direction together as a team so that the CIO is pretty much always brought into those conversations at the right time, not after they've already made the decisions or after some contracts paid or whatever direction they're trying to go in without that collaboration.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, the job at its core, the job is relationship management.
Yeah.
You've got to build relationships. You've got to manage relationships. There'll be more good times than bad times. I like to say that the CIO's job in relationship management is like a marriage. There's more good times. Well, actually, there's more bad times than good times. But if you can make it to 7 years, you might just survive it.
And that is you're the coins, excuse me, the terms you keep coining are so spot on. The marriage, it's all about communication. It's all about that back and forth relationship. It's all about that expectation setting. And that's spot on yet again. So moving on to, again, trying to keep up with this era of technology that is passing us by. We often say healthcare is uh, we take time to adopt for obvious and good reasons with our patient care purposes and quality of care, safety. Now, leaders keep expecting us to stay in tune or stay um, aligned with the other industries. But with the rapid innovation and balance, the trust with the clinicians and patient safety and the regulations, how do you think, from a little step deeper into the how, can we guide our CIOs to better manage this? I know we talked about relationship building, we talked about governance, and how are we at the table to make sure that we're part of the solution? Is there anything else you would you be willing to share when it comes to other barriers with safeties, patient safety and regulations?
Yeah, so what's interesting is that many healthcare CIOs are in this reactive posture. Right? So they're fielding requests from multiple inputs. People want to see innovation, they want to see the AI, they want to see the results. You've got clinicians using every tool you never authorized in your health system. And that then leads to what I like to call the 6-month collapse, because you're getting all these inputs and no real method to the madness. I think a CIO has to think about that communication that we've talked about extensively, but they need to focus on ethics. They need to focus on building governance around the data that they manage, because you can't scale AI and innovation solutions on a foundation of messy, biased, siloed data. And it goes back to saying, build that trust fabric, and how data is used, how models are validated. It's the only way you're going to move from something you do sort of ad hoc to a permanent solution. I think the differentiator is CIOs working in integration. There's lots of experimentation going on with tools, technology, but you as the person in the middle have to operationalize what is happening in the technology stack and marry that with what is happening in the real world on the ground and what that means. So I think you need to move fast, and you need to do that without breaking any trust, because you built all these relationships. So I would suggest thinking of a guardrail first type approach for CIOs, where you don't slow down innovation, but you speed up the safety checks around the technology that you're implementing, or even people are implementing in a shadow way. Go and check that those shadow tools are done with a safety first and a safety check environment. Don't overemphasize or focus on governance or set up too many committees, as this is the old model of IT saying no, which seriously upsets customers. But make sure that you have the ability to track what's doing. Because what I've sort of learned in my journey is, if you go out there and you evangelize and then people ask you to do things and you say no, as we discussed, they go and do it anyway because they have to do it and they want to do it, and you're not going to be the one to stop them. So by building a model where you are the yes, however person, where you can provide some caveats that need to be met for you to support an initiative. So caveats like patient safety, patient outcomes, ethics, biases, cost, business cases, all those things. Then you start building that trust first type fabric with your partners. You could say partners in crime. And then you're actually building a platform of services that you know about. First of all, you can support, and people have provided some information so that you can make sure that it protects the health system and doesn't put the health system at risk. So these are some of the things you could think about versus the it's just a no, because a just a no means somebody's going to do something naughty.
Yeah. In that fabric of trust and that relationship and the shadow partnerships, we have our chief AI officers, we have our CMIOs, we have compliance, we have all these other partners that you speak of that can also be a ally, or again, nobody does anything on negative on purpose, but everyone has the goals and certain um, directives. And when we, in our IT hat on only, to your point, provide only blockers, then people in any role are going to find other solutions where they're in their heart believe that they're impacting either workflow or patient safety or quality of care that could inadvertently cause other issues behind the scenes that you'll have to deal with later if you're again not at that table. Um, so the CIO of the future. What's the one capability that today's CIOs don't have but must develop, you believe, in the coming years, maybe sooner than later?
Yeah, so let me just address the whole trust thing. I think trust is a team sport. So you as a CIO must build a strong relationship with the CFO, the chief medical officer, the chief legal officer, the chief people officer, and all the clinical division heads. I found in my journey that the chief people officer is a huge person to partner with because you're dealing with people and you're dealing with change. And people are difficult and people are very, very hard to understand. But when you're talking at the technology level, the team support partnership or co-pilots are the CIOs and the CMIOs. Because while the board provides oversight and you might have other people like a chief innovation or a chief AI officer because they have a specialized focus, the CIO owns the infrastructure of trust, the security, the reliability, and the CMIO owns the clinical validation of that trust. So those people are going to be joined at the hip, should be fast friends or at least professional friends so they can work together and also work in partnership to provide radical transparency, meaning that you have to be honest with clinicians about what you can and cannot do. It also involves constant auditing for biases and making sure that humans are always in the loop for any sort of requirement for any clinical intervention. To your point about, what does the CIO of the future look like? I think the next generation of CIO must be very comfortable discussing model drift and inference costs versus server costs and bandwidth and networks, things that people don't care about because they expect in 2026 and beyond, those systems just run without flaw. I think the CIO of the future must become the chief arbitrator, must become the chief arbiter of which intelligence, human or artificial, is best suited for a specific task. And I think the CIO of the future has to stop leading with the how and start leading with the so what. Because your stakeholders don't care about your work, your cloud, your infrastructure, your applications, your neural network. What they care about is the extra 30 minutes they get back with their patients, or the reduction in diagnostic errors that you and your team have made happen. So the future generation CIO will fail or get fired if they can't tie every technical investment to a clinical or patient outcome. You're not just leading anymore. You've got to be that leader, and you can't just manage technology. So those would be some of the things I would see a future CIO doing.
Thank you. Wow. I love this conversation. I really appreciate your time. As we close, is there any final words of guidance or any piece of advice that you want to leave our listeners and our executives listening to this call with?
I would say that working in healthcare IT technology, there's nothing like it, because we all serve missions in different health systems. And if you don't understand, there's a few things to understand. So healthcare technologists are in the business of patients, not in the business of technology. If you want to do technology and be a software company, you need to go work for a software company. I think that healthcare IT leaders must approach their jobs with a massive amount of courage, because courage is going to be needed to overcome the hurdles that we will face in 2026 and beyond. And lastly, I would say that healthcare IT leaders need to be change agents and not be afraid of resistance, but also be the champions of that change, so that they can help in the transformation of their organizations to what their organizations need to become in 2026 and beyond, due to the external factors that are putting pressure on health systems.
Thank you. Thank you for leaving us with that. And again, I'm deeply honored and appreciative of your time today. I appreciate you, and I hope everyone enjoyed this as deeply as I did. Have a wonderful day, everyone, and talk to you soon.
Thank you.